Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely eerie, suspenseful, and frankly, mind-boggling unsolved mystery straight out of the shadows of post-World War II Europe. I mean, the dust of the Second World War had barely settled, yet a new, highly classified, covert war was already kicking off. We're talking state-sanctioned espionage, deep deception, and ticking timers in the dead of night. Let's get right into it. Just imagine the pure dread in these shadowy Mediterranean ports back in 1947. You have these dark, lapping waters, it's quiet, and suddenly, a string of mysterious, massive explosions starts whipping through the hulls of docked ships, just totally crippling them right there at anchor. The locals are completely confused, the authorities are baffled, and whoever is doing this is just vanishing into the night without a single trace. So the burning question on literally everyone's mind was, who on earth was blowing up these ships? And this wasn't just some isolated incident either. Between the summer of 1947 and early 1948, exactly 5 different ships were targeted by these terrifying, seemingly random midnight bombings, mostly over in Italian ports. One ship was entirely destroyed, 2 were severely damaged, and 2 more explosive devices were miraculously found right before they could detonate. But to really figure out who was behind this crazy reign of maritime sabotage, we have to look closely at the targets themselves. Part 1. The Desperate Exodus. To understand these attacks, we've got to pull back and look at who exactly was on these vessels. Look, these definitely weren't luxury ocean liners or military warships. They were part of this massive, desperate exodus driven by the Aliyah Bet movement. We are talking about tens of thousands of Jewish refugees, the overwhelming majority being Holocaust survivors trying to reach Palestine. This underground network had scraped together about 60 ships. Honestly, most were just decommissioned Rust Bucket War surplus vessels, rescued from U.S. boneyards. The goal? Bypass a very strict British naval blockade. All told, some 80,000 refugees attempted this incredibly perilous journey, knowing full well that getting intercepted meant almost certain incarceration in British detention camps. Well, as you can probably guess, this mass immigration sparked intense political panic for the British government. The sheer volume of this human tide was completely overwhelming the British authorities, who were desperately trying to maintain their mandate and juggle the geopolitical nightmare in the Middle East. This panic went all the way to the top. Prime Minister Clement Attlee actually demanded immediate practical action to stop the flow of refugees at the source, way before they ever reached that blockade. Diplomatic pressure just wasn't cutting it anymore. Part 2. Launching Operation Embarrass. For decades, the culprits behind these harbor bombings were a total mystery. Most of the world just assumed it was some rogue terror group, right? But looking at these newly unsealed, top-secret files, we get a massive, shocking twist. The attacks were orchestrated by the British government itself. Using MI6, Britain's secret intelligence service, the government launched a highly classified, totally deniable sabotage mission. It's just astonishing to see in black and white that these weren't rogue actors at all. It was a deliberate state-sponsored campaign to physically disable refugee ships right there in European ports. The absolutely crucial point here is that this was state-sanctioned sabotage. They literally codenamed it Operation Embarrass, and the objective was explicitly clear: disable these tramp steamers before they could even load their human cargo. It was a cold, incredibly calculated move to stem the tide of immigration by neutralizing the transportation itself, all while hiding the British government's hand behind a smokescreen of unexplained accidents. The roster of people involved reads straight out of a spy thriller. The operation was ordered directly by the Foreign Secretary Ernest Bevan. The meticulous planning, that fell to Colonel Harold Perkins, who was a really seasoned special operations executive veteran from the war. And to actually execute these eerie midnight raids, MI6 recruited hardened Special Forces operatives. Most notably, Lieutenant Colonel David Smiley, a famous, real-life cloak and dagger adventurer, and Wing Commander Derek Verschoyle. Now, obviously, British intelligence officers couldn't just stroll into Italian ports wearing their uniforms, right? So to avoid suspicion in these dark, bustling harbors, Smiley, Verschoyle, and their team adopted a brilliant, if pretty gritty, cover story. They posed as Adriatic cigarette smugglers. Operating in these tiny boats, they would slip through the inky waters completely unnoticed, just blending right in with the illicit black market trade that was thriving in post-war Europe, while they scouted their targets. Part 3. Limpet mines and lies. But setting the explosives was only half the mission. The rest of it was a masterclass in absolute deception. Keeping the British government completely insulated from the fallout required some intense psychological warfare. Just look at this step-by-step playbook. It's chilling. First, the operatives would attach British-made limpet mines to the hulls of the ships. Crucially, these mines were fitted with timers, which gave the team time to complete Step 2, fleeing Italian waters entirely before the big boom. But Steps 3 and 4? That is where the real spycraft happens. They planted fake evidence framing completely fictitious Arab groups and simultaneously leaked rumors pointing the finger at the Soviet Union. It was a massive, tangled web of plausible deniability.
The stakes were sky high, so MI6 had a very strict contingency plan. If Smiley or his guys were ever caught red-handed with the explosives, they were under absolute strict instructions to never, ever admit their connection to His Majesty's government. Instead, they were given this elaborate, fabricated backstory. They were told to claim they'd been recruited in New York by a group of anti-communist international industrialists, when in reality, they were acting on the direct, highly classified orders of London.
The level of detail in this deception is just staggering. MI6 actually went out of their way to acquire specific foreign typewriters. Why? Well, because they needed them to forge claim of responsibility letters from a completely made-up group that they dubbed the Defenders of Arab Palestine. They carefully leaked these forged documents around Whitehall and to the press, deliberately creating this elaborate smoke and mirrors campaign to keep the scent as far away from British intelligence as humanly possible. And the scale of this operation almost reached disastrous historical proportions. Declassified files show that the team actually scouted and considered bombing the Baltimore steamship President Warfield while it was anchored in France. Now, if that name sounds familiar, it's because that very vessel would shortly become world-famous as the Exodus. A British attack on that specific ship would have literally changed history, but thankfully, they ultimately held off on that particular target. Part 4. Unearthing the Darkest Page. Now, you might be wondering, how does an espionage operation of this magnitude, involving bombings in Allied European ports, targeting Holocaust survivors, stay completely hidden from the world for decades? Well, the answer lies in the intense secrecy protocols of the British government. The explosive truth of Operation Embarrass was quite literally locked away in cabinet office safes. Successive governments were absolutely terrified of the geopolitical and public relations nightmare that would erupt if anyone found out British agents had mined boats intended for displaced refugees. So, a strict conspiracy of silence was maintained, and the whole operation was buried deep in the archives. When those files were finally unsealed and the truth came to light, it sent absolute shockwaves through the historical community. This chilling quote from a retired intelligence officer perfectly captures the grim reality of the mission, calling it the blackest page in MI6's post-war history. It remains a deeply controversial episode, and it really highlights the extreme, often morally ambiguous lengths a state will go to in order to enforce its geopolitical will. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a rather provocative thought. If a highly organized, state-sponsored bombing campaign in the Mediterranean can be swept under the rug and kept perfectly hidden in cabinet safes for over 60 years, what else is waiting to be declassified? It really forces us to think about accountability, the shadows of history, and the profound secrets that governments are still keeping hidden in the dark. Thank you so much for joining me for this deep dive, and I hope this provided you with a clear, structured understanding of a truly astonishing piece of hidden history.